All right, so let's talk about other vendors. Then the following week is both D2L Fusion, and which is in Savannah, Georgia. Morgan's going, and then InstructureCon, which is in Spokane, Washington, that I'm going to. So let's start with a D2L Fusion. And I will point out, so I went to that last year. This year, Morgan's going to it. Last year, it was dominated by D2L saying, we're differentiating based on interactive content development. Increase it with the H5P acquisition and their own Creator Plus. How do we offer more for people to not just create content, but interactive content within the LMS? That was what dominated last year. And AI was within that context. How does it help get that done? And a few other things. So it's quite different than Anthology. This year, I'm not quite sure if you have a good preview of what it's going to be like. But so, Morgan, what are you going to be looking for at the conference beyond some excellent haunted seafood joints while you're in Savannah?
I'm going to be staying inside. That's what I'm going to be doing, having had a taste of southern summer recently in Atlanta. So I'm going to be staying inside in the probably pretty good air conditioning. So that's what I'm going to be doing. But I think following on of their non-credit move, because they have, uh, purchased a company that they're doing there, but I want to see what the progress is. I think also, it relates to that approach about content and things like that, but gets to some larger things that I'm looking at is pricing strategy and the way that they're sort of thinking about that and how that's going to work. Because I think LMSs are traditionally underpriced, so places are looking at the add-ons and things like that, which traditionally doesn't go down well with clients. So what is that sort of tension there? So that's another thing that I'm going to be looking at. I'm also this is just a small thing, but I'm going to be looking for clients from Canada who aren't yet clients of D2L to see what's going on because there's some pressure in Canada, particularly Ontario, uh, to move to D2L and in terms of the trade troubles. So those are some of the things I'm going to be looking at. But again, to see how far that content strategy has evolved, because it's all very well to announce it, but it's really the evolution that's really important to me. Can you move on from that initial announcement?
So this is risky, but you're breezing past two points that I think we've written about, but I think we need to highlight because they're significant. One is you talked about it, LMS is underpriced. So Morgan once again saying colleges and universities, you are not paying enough for your LMS or VLE. The second thing you mentioned was the very pithy phrase, the trade troubles. Um, and what you're so describe both of those a little bit more.
And you mentioned risky, and a few years back, I said this exact thing to the CEO of one of the LMS companies, and actually a very calm man normally, but I thought he was going to punch me. He almost climbed over the table. He didn't like that. But if you look at the pricing for LMSs, it's remained flat for a very long time, even if they as they have added extra features and put a lot of investment into things like AI and making the user interface thing. So I think it's underpriced relative to the importance on the campus and to what it's doing as well. The trade troubles. I'm borrowing a page from Neil's countryman who talked about the troubles. You know, so it's not quite as bad as that, but the tariff wars between the United States and everybody, including islands of penguins, who fortunately don't have LMS companies. But I'm hearing from some Canadian clients that there is some pressure to start to think about moving away from an instructor or a, a Blackboard, in part to limit their vulnerability to some of this uh, tariff concern, even though in the past these kinds of services have not been subject to tariffs. Am I right in that, Phil?
Yeah, I think that's right. I would liken it to in the mid to late 2010s. I got the same feeling in Europe, although it started out as sort of the dominant feeling of because of the NSA and the data privacy issues. And there was a heavy bias against US companies because of, well, how do we know that your data isn't going to be going to the US and then you have no idea where it's going? And I think the AWS center in Frankfurt really helped solve that bias. But I liken that there, what you're saying is there's an emerging bias from Canadian institutions to not go American. That's what I'm hearing from you.
So I'll be walking around saying, "Hey, anybody want to watch some hockey?"
Yeah.
And
Oh my gosh. I'm
I
not
think
sure you
about,
should do that.
yeah, to see if anybody comes and chats with me. But
I think
I
we've just
can't tell if that's a South African or Canadian accent, but
I'm not good at accents. It's bad enough having my own one. Although I sometimes joke that if I'd known that having an accent was going to be such a big hit, I would have gotten one earlier. But
okay.
um,
So Neil,
I
tell us about D2L in your
I'm
mind and what questions you have.
I'm fascinated because I'd never expected the LMS to be part of a kind of a buy local, buy regional kind of movement, but maybe that's going to be the Canadian campaign for D2L. I shall watch that with interest.
LMS to table movement. Yes.
Yeah. Um, I think the strategic point that Morgan made around the kind of add-on strategy, I think, is front of mind for me, just because I remember when I was in Amsterdam for the D2L conference, the European conference, I think one of the things that struck me in one of the sessions, and I forget which add-on it was now, so forgive me, but the show of hands for people who'd actually adopted it was not what you would have hoped it to be in a session like that. And so, when you're sort of executing on that strategy and you're developing those kind of add-ons, I mean, you want to see impact, but ultimately you also want to see and prove that kind of strategy, really. So I'm not sure that this would necessarily come to light at a conference, but it's certainly not through the main sessions, but it's kind of gauging the extent to which actually people are adopting these things that are kind of new and developing, such that you can get a sense of actually, how that strategy is performing. Because we kind of questioned it in the past around, the institutional finances and whether these things would come under review when institutions are thinking about a VLE change. So that's a big one for me. I've seen bits and bobs around Lumi, so I'm kind of interested in seeing how that's progressing and how.
And just for people, Lumi is their branding of the AI tools within D2L Brightspace.
Yeah. So I'm interested in how big that becomes. I'm interested in whether that continues to be this thing, or whether it just gets kind of I guess sort of it just blends into the product, if I can put it like that. Because I think that's another element of like how you think about AI in relation to a product too. So those are the big things for me for D2L. Or maybe one other thing, if I can just add it, I'm just interested also in terms of focus, because I think, to my earlier point, when I sort of survey the scene in maybe the last 6 months for some of these companies in the UK, I see a lot of stuff around kind of international movements and adoptions and things like DTL have been really pushing around kind of that presence in Ireland, and so it's sort of what's coming out in terms of market focus and whether that tells you anything.
So one thing about D2L, I mean, they have, clearly they, along with Instructure Canvas, have been the winners in terms of new implementations. But we've already described there aren't that many opportunities anymore. And we're not sure when that's going to increase. But they've also, going to your point, they've invested in a lot of features. They've always had a lot of features, particularly compared to Canvas. But with the Lumi, the Creator Plus, the H5P acquisition, they have even more. So part of it is how much do they, or how well is that leveraging of depth of features impacting what people are talking about. So I'd love to hear from you, Morgan, about what people talking about. Oh, this feature in Creator Plus, this feature over here, or as Neil's, talking about, even if you can get the whole raise of hands, who's using Creator Plus and paying for it to make yourself popular. I would add one other thing: Stephen Laster leaving and going to Panopto. He was president and COO. John Baker, founder, CEO, is jumping back into that more of that operational role. But that raises a question: are we sort of pulling the company backwards in time? Not necessarily backwards in functionality, but what is the management change, particularly with Stephen leaving? What does that mean? And does that change the direction of where they're going? John's is by far the remaining
Survivor.
founder CEO who's there, right?
Yeah.
So how much does that longevity, and it's not all private equity and stuff like that, how does that play from a management perspective is another big question, even more than last year, from what I saw. So going back to that pricing, I think that we talked about the stability of pricing, which is not necessarily good, but because the LMS market is underpriced, that's what so often forces companies to go into corporate markets or do other things just to justify themselves to investors, which isn't necessarily good with colleges and their core audience. So part of the reason I think it's underpriced is because if these systems were priced higher, I think we'd get more focus from the companies of truly supporting what colleges and universities need. But direct your ire at Morgan for that point.
And just in from 2014 to 2024, 2022, I just did a lot of contract reviews with institutions, and especially in the earlier part of that period, the mid-teens, there was a lot of, particularly of Blackboard, of just add-ons and things like that. And I think places, really underestimate how much that annoys higher ed. It just drives them crazy. So that when Instructure came with very simple contracts, just one price pretty much that included everything that they needed, they jumped to that just because they like that simplicity in a way. Sure, there were other things going on, but that was a big part of it.
Yeah, true.